Good morning, everyone. How are we today? Great. Anybody got anything good in their goodie bag so far? Anyone win any golden tickets? No? Well, they're out there. Thank you for coming to the first panel of Salute 53. We're very excited to welcome you back for the third one of these events. And our first topic, which is elite units in wargaming, which I thought was the best one to start with our Highlander theme this year, because we love men in kilts who really want to kill other people, apparently. They tell me this. So joining me for our first discussion is, from Kansas and Jayhawk Games, Brad Sanders. From Yeah, there we go. Bit of applause. From Two Fat Lardies, the esteemed Richard Clarke. If I sat here and told you what Alessio Cavatore did, we'd be here for an entire panel. But you know him for Warhammer, you know him for Lord of the Rings, you know him for Bolt Action. It's Alessio Cavatore. And joining us from the revolutionary halls of Warmaster, we have Mr. Chris Orr. So, as I said at the start, we are here to talk about the concept of elite units in wargaming. And the first question I have for each of our panelists is, when somebody tells you, I need this unit to be veteran or elite, what do you think?
Good question. Check, this is working. Okay,
I got to bring it
right into it. So, I mean, I think, and maybe we can all jump in on this, but the concept of what's elite and what's not elite and what is veteran, perhaps, is a really interesting topic. I've been thinking a lot about this before the panel is, what really is an elite unit? Does it mean that when a unit's called elite, right, are they really elite? Are they represented elite in a war game? Or is it a popular term, right? Do things like, if the population, if the people who game think it's elite, do you treat them as elite? And I think it gets kind of complex when you get down to it. And of course, there's two sides to this as well. There's historic side, right? Were they elite? Did they rise to that occasion? And then there's the sci-fi fantasy side, right? Which is, do I take these characters and do I want them to be elite in my story, in my universe? And so then the question is, okay, once you have the concept of elite, how do I treat them in the game different than all the other units?
Because it's very easy when you're doing real units, because you can get tangible. For you guys doing more fantasy elements, you're kind of just pushing into no. You've got to make decisions about what the boundaries are. So what do you have to think? What do you have to say to that?
Well, deciding is immensely different between historical and fantasy. Absolutely, yeah. The historical, often it depends who you ask.
Yeah,
you know, what's your source? Were these guys elite? And you look at one side of the war, and they will say yes, absolutely. And you ask the other side, and we're like, nah, really no, because your guys are always more elite than the other guys elite, right? There's like the guys on your side.
Every regiment in the British Army thinks they're the best regiment, but that can't actually be true.
There is that, yes. I was in Italy recently where you go, all these elite troops, and you kind of go, that's not what I normally hear when I hear about, But so, yeah, everybody thinks their guys are the elite.
And then I would just mention the opposite of that, which is you see time and time again units that aren't considered elite rise to the occasion, right? And all of a sudden, they walk away from whatever battle it was, what have you, and you could see that they had those elite tendencies, even though they weren't, quote, elite.
Because I'm just thinking, I mean, when you go with Two Fat Lardies and you lean on that playing the period, you have to try and really lean on how history just throws situations that don't match. And we expect so many things of elite units. And I know you, at TFL, you're doing lots of stuff with Arnhem. And I can't think of a better example of a crack unit not doing what it's meant to do than the Battle of Arnhem. So, I mean, when you plan your scenarios, you have, I suppose, how do you deal with the fact that you expect a certain thing of your planning and you come out of it and even the historical evidence challenges the concept of elite or veterancy?
I think there's a really interesting point here. And when we look at elites, it tends to be a cover-all term that means something of a mishmash of lots of different things. So we could be talking about how well trained a unit is. We could be talking about levels of fitness. We could be talking about levels of competence with the weapons that they're using. But equally, we could be talking about leadership. So when you talk about Arnhem, we're running a game here today based on the Battle of Arnhem, and you look at the British forces there. Some of those units, whilst we think parachute regiment, they're going to be elite. They're going to be elite. That tends to be based on a modern perception of the parachute regiment, which is more based on what happened in the Falklands than what happened in the 1940s. And many of the battalions in the parachute regiment in the Second World War had been really, really well trained, but had never been in action. This is a very, very, very valuable resource that you keep on the shelf until you have exactly the right mission for it. And when you then drop them into action, you find that whilst the blokes are prepared to die in a ditch and fight to absolutely to the point where when they get pushed out of that ditch, they find the next ditch and are then prepared to die in that one as well, you've got a unit that's very, very difficult to shift. But if you're looking for dynamism in terms of leadership, it simply isn't always there. There's no surprise that Frost got through to the bridge. That was a man with far more experience than any of the other contemporary battalion commanders. Whereas when you look on the other side and you look at a German training unit which encountered the British around Wolfhazer, which was literally made up of recruits who were pretty shoddy troops, but they had fabulous leadership in terms of a cadre of NCOs who'd been fighting for 5 years on all different fronts, who knew that what you do is you react and respond and you make a decision. The classic German command trope that making any decision is better than making no decision. And those troops simply put themselves in the way of the parachute regiment and did sufficient to stop them achieving their objectives. So the concept of elite can mean different things.
So do we think sometimes when we say elite units, are we just talking about elite leadership? Is that what...
I wouldn't have said so. I mean, you both mentioned examples of where a unit on the tabletop is supposed to do a certain thing and it doesn't. Or something unexpectedly does something really good. Anybody in the audience ever had really, really spectacularly bad dice rolls at a critical moment of the game? Yeah, well, that's that exact
that might
thing.
be every single
Sometimes
person.
stuff happens. But you mentioned a lot of sort of different things that you can model within a unit. From a sort of a design point of view, you can represent all those things. But there does, I think, need to be some like restraint, because every different thing you add on a stat line, it's one more thing to look up. Every different unit type is one more thing to look up. And eventually you end up in a situation where you spend half your time looking up stat lines on the table, which personally, one of the reasons I play probably only Warmaster, very little of other games. It's very simple. Once you've got your army list into your head, you hardly actually really have to look at the list, and the gameplay can become much more fast, which I find much more enjoyable. So whilst modeling elite stuff is great, sometimes a bit of restraint to allow gameplay to flow and be nice.
I was
Please.
going to actually say pretty much exactly the same thing.
I learned it off you. So.
I was going to add that when you're trying to make something elite, the temptation is special rule. You kind of go, this will make them different, special rule. And then, of course, you create exception, potentially units are too good. So the advice would be for me is always to look at the stats first. Can I make them elite just by the stats? A lot easier on the brain, normally less chances of destroying the game with creating a monster effectively. So, yes, I think I would definitely kind of agree with that restraint of maybe look at the stats, not the special rules first. If you really have to, one special rule, but no more. Yeah, I would say that.
I think there's an interesting point that, yes, you can create your stat lines to reflect the unit, but you can also look at leadership and the way that is represented, because that can allow a unit to recover from the damage that it has taken more rapidly. So an elite unit that has taken any number of hits can recover from that more quickly by using a leadership mechanism that allows them to achieve that. Whilst the stat line for two units could be identical, you could have two different levels of leadership which could allow one to perform better than the other. So you can combine different games mechanisms in order to get an overall result where you combine, yes, they're well trained, but not well led, is very different to, yes, they're well trained, but they are well led, which again is different to no, they're not well trained, but yes, they are well led. You've got different results and outcomes whilst you've got the same stat lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you that leadership is absolutely key to modeling a, quote, elite unit. The question I have for you guys, though, is that as a game designer, and when you're looking at an elite unit, and especially units that are popular, right, with gamers, right, British Airborne in World War II, right, extremely popular. Everybody wants to game Arnhem. Do you feel a certain pressure to model them a certain way, right? You know that the expectation out here is that, oh, these are the best men fighting in the world. And if you do your research, you do your homework, and you find out that, maybe it's not necessarily so true. Are you afraid, right, that your game, your unit will not be as popular, and people will be like, oh, you modeled them all wrong. These are superheroes, and they are the best guys in the world. You know, under my command, I could take the bridge, right? I could totally win Arnhem. You know, I find that very interesting dynamic when I'm designing those types of units. Now, I do a lot of Cold War gaming. And Cold War, I think, adds a special dynamic because there's no combat. There was no test, right? So people talk about how their units were elite. And, you know, Black Watch is a great example, right? They are considered to be an elite unit, right? But no one ever fought the Cold War. So when you're modeling that, it's very difficult to say what would have really happened. And, of course, like you had mentioned earlier, everybody thinks their regiment's the best. Right? So if I don't model that correctly in the game, what pressure do I feel, right? Am I going to lose an audience because they don't feel that I've done elite units correctly?
And especially if you're working with big franchise fantasy stuff like Lord of the Rings, people really want stuff to act like it was in the films, act like it is in the books, and they're, you know, in the story they wrote when they were 12. And you've got to try and make a game that's balanced and try and challenge them a little bit. So you can't have, you know, your Rohirrim walk across the table, because whoever's playing them is going to have the most miserable half an hour of their life. But you've got to do something to make it interesting.
Yeah, it's relatively straightforward in history because, you know, the variables are more limited. But yes, when you go into things like that, you go, write me the rules for Sauron. Because we saw him fighting, right? He was just, you know, sweeping armies like that. Or the Balrog. You're going to go, yeah, the Balrog has to be a playable piece. Really?
I'd really prefer if it wasn't.
So indeed, you do these things and you risk breaking the game. You tend to make them scenario-based if you can. You not let them lose in the wild, because then, yes, you may break the game. And I think when doing those things, for me, the best solution, unless I'm told to, the best solution is not. Just because if you leave Sauron, the Balrog, the Primarchs in Warhammer and 40k, don't do them, they become something that people can just imagine how powerful these things are. And then you can dream about it, you can try to imagine what it would be like. The moment you put them on a table and they can be killed, oh look, my Rohirrim just taken down Sauron. I was like, well, here you go. My Hobbit's just taken down Sauron. I was like, there we go.
I mean, that's great. I mean, fantasy gaming, the pressure, I think, on the games designers come from somebody makes a model for it. And immediately there's a model for it. Where's the stat lines for that? Where's the special rules for that? And again, keeping things the same. Most of us, I think, are familiar with the way that high elves work in the Warhammer world. There are all sorts of different high elf units, which you can get little teeny tiny Warmaster models for. But some clever person who did the rules for that said, look, they're all the same. So on the tabletop, same stuff. Nothing is particularly elite, because as you move up the scale, on a small scale game, those little variations are important. As the scale gets bigger, so the small scale games where you're enacting larger battles, it becomes less important. The critical things on the units become a little bit less significant. The other thing, actually, as from an elite point of view, which perhaps we can ask about, when you guys are designing something, does the dice that you're using, does that influence some of your mechanics? Because if you have something that's based on a 6-sided dice, and something goes from 3+ to 2+ roll, so if it becomes 1 point easier to make the roll on a 6-sided dice, that's quite a big influence. But if you're using D8, D10 kind of mechanics, then will those very small variations become less chunky?
Oh, yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, from my point of view, a range of 6 potential outcomes is I'm quite comfortable with that. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, there is, especially if you're using multiple dice. You know, the probability issue is certainly something you have to think about when you're designing a game, because the difference between +1 when the outcome is 2 and +1 when the outcome is 7, for example, on 2d6 is quite significant. But
Yeah, in my game, we use a D20, and we picked the D20 on purpose for the range. And it's so fascinating. From a sci-fi and fantasy world, you get to design your own world, your own thing. But when you're modeling, let's say, World War II, right, you don't have that luxury, because ultimately there are units that are the entire spectrum. You don't get to choose that, oh, okay, here's my baseline, and I'm going to have, +1, +2. No, you've got to model everything that's thrown at you. So we needed that range to be able to go that up and down and have that dynamic.
I mean, it's an interesting way when you think about true quality and morale rolls, because you can really get the incrementality of, this is a decent unit that hasn't slept for 30 hours. We can knock its rating down marginally, versus these guys have had, bed and breakfast beforehand. They've been in a battle taxi to the engagement. You can get the sort of incrementality that's so important to how a unit performs. Because one of the things I think about how we think about elite units is so much of it is unbelievably circumstantial. An example I can think of is if you're British, the main one is Rorke's Drift. And, you have the Zulus against 24th Regiment. Both sides are kind of average. But in the popular memory, they're not, because one side is just well-led, knows what it's doing, and the other side has just won a really big battle. But Wargames writers will sometimes consider both elite just because of the circumstance. So I wonder if, for everyone, when you're thinking about scenarios, thinking about trying to encourage people to write their own, how you try and encourage people to consider how you alter mechanics, how you alter troops' ratings based on sheer circumstance of events.
I certainly think there's an issue that wargamers have anticipations and expectations when it comes to certain units. Whether we as game designers have an obligation to match what they expect is another issue altogether. But as a general principle, I find that whilst a lot of people will say they love the idea of playing a game with lots of exciting new ideas in it, there's a limit to how many exciting new ideas they actually want.
3 a year.
Yeah, so you can't push the boundaries to the extent that you are really going to turn over the apple cart completely. You can push boundaries, and I think it's important to say, well, maybe the whole concept of elite units is somewhat artificial. Maybe we should be looking at saying, well, these units have a pretty constant capability, but there are other differences that we use to identify their successes and failures. Now, some of that could potentially be based on, what's happening during the game. If a unit is achieving certain successes, that could bolster its morale.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've always liked in bolt action with when you have completely fresh units, you don't find out how good they are until they're shot at. And it's such a great way to represent that new units you have no idea whether these guys like it until they actually find out what being on the fire is. And they might turn out to be really up for it, even with no training.
I guess the drawback for that is bookkeeping, because then you have to
yes.
remember whether that unit has been shot and what happened to it after it's been shot.
Yeah.
So trade-offs for that level of detail, I guess. Also the quantity of units in your army. I mean, if you have an entire army of elite, and because your army is themed to like Red Beret, but often when you give people the option of choosing regular units or elite units. It depends, I guess, if they're tournament players or not, but often you have to kind of limit them a bit on the ratio there. Otherwise, people tend to ignore everything that is not elite and just go, I'll pick only these guys and ignore everything else. Which, I guess, in a competitive environment could be an issue. In a friendly environment, not at all.
It is funny, we have split in the middle between point systems, non-point systems, which wasn't on purpose, it just is. But I don't know whether you both can speak to how you get that right with point systems, because how do you quantify being slightly better at this in a way that doesn't feel unfair? Because you could just make it extra, but it's sort of generally how do you write a system, a point scale that you kind of go, yeah, that'll do? Or is it just simply going +4, I'm done?
Okay, I think that's probably two things there. Number one, when you write something that's completely new and let it out into the world, sometimes it's going to be well received, sometimes it's going to be badly received. And as the designer, you sort of think, oh, these comments aren't very nice. But you actually have to kind of step away from and say, well, actually, no, we did get that wrong. We got that wrong. So having some humility to go back to the drawing board, I think would probably be good advice. Been there, done that. As for how you set the points values, I don't know. Pick a number, model it on something else, and then if it feels that it's overpointed or underpointed, you can tweak it later.
Because it is.
It's play testing, isn't it? You say, right, that's what I think will work for this Balrog. And you play the game and you go, oh my God, the Balrog is going to take over the world. And you can't have that. So you go back and you play test and you play test. And only when you get to the point where that feels that you've got the balance right, because you're quantifying something that really is unquantifiable, but you can only get that right through trial and error.
Because it is, you can sit with your armor scales and you can pull out all the diagrams, but no one can actually, there's no nice spreadsheet that will tell you that is a good soldier, that is a bad soldier, despite 80 years of people trying to be able to figure that spreadsheet out, which makes our lives difficult, but
I mean, Rick Priestley, the person I learned from everything I know about wargaming, he says always that there is no balance in wargaming. There is only the illusion of balance, or something that is reasonably, arguably balanced. You will never get this unit, 10 of these guys are worth like 5 of those guys in every circumstance, in every scenario, under every possible variability of dice rolling, terrain, etc. So as long as you can have an argument that there's not an obvious, these guys are obviously broken and too good, I think you've done your job in terms of point.
Sure, and I don't want to harp on a point system versus non-point system, but
we are having there will be a grudge match in the hallway after lunch.
But one of the advantages to a scenario situation based is there's a story there, right? And that story you get to inform and educate and talk to the gamer about perhaps why these units are elite in this moment in time at this place. History has shown out that this is what happened. And in telling that story and developing that scenario, right, gives a tremendous advantage. And I think, hopefully, the gamer is looking at a little differently, right? When you talk about, I want to replay Arnhem and I want to see if I could do a little better than what actually happened, is a total different mentality than when I play point system games. I want all the elite guys because I want to win, right? And I want those extra little things I can get. So it's just a different mentality when it comes to elite troops in those two different types of game systems.
But then with points versus non-points, what you're describing there, who are you likely to be playing with? You'll have set this up with some of your friends, people you know, points-based systems. You can turn up with a certain amount of stuff in your bag, play against somebody you've never met, and you know that you're going to have a reasonable, fair game.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, oh, no doubt about it. No doubt. Absolutely.
I have to say that people say, oh, you don't really do point systems, and we don't really do point systems, but we do point systems in that we have point systems in there, but they're there to inform you so you can create a scenario which is going to give you a good and enjoyable result. We don't do competition games with our rules, but we do, games are competitive. And if I'm playing against any of you guys, you want to think you've got a chance of winning, and I want to think I've got a chance of winning. And having a numerical value assigned to a unit does allow you to top that up and go, hey, that should be a good game. And I'm attacking, so maybe I give myself a few more points. You're defending, maybe you're defending a village, so I take a few points off you because you benefit from the cover.
And it is a good guide for people who know nothing about a topic to go, okay, they've got a better points value, they must be better. It's a good starting point.
Well, it's a good guide for me when I'm putting a scenario together. It helps me as much as it helps anybody else.
I can't believe you'd ever forget anything, Rich. So just to, I think, sort of go interest in more the mechanical side. And I wondered if everybody, let's start with the favorite, because we talk about special rules and, you come with special rules for elite units and special mechanics. I wondered if each of you has a special mechanic or rule for how you've represented elite or elite quality specials that you've enjoyed writing or enjoyed playing or enjoyed stealing from another writer. You get the idea. If we want to go around and Brad, if you want to start,
You want to start with me? I don't
we'll go
know.
around. You're on my left, and that's
Yeah,
like,
that's okay. That's all right. Is there a special rule? So I don't have any necessarily special rules for elites or something that I hold out. It's much more of what everybody talked about, which is you're looking at all the stats and trying to model that type of elite, whether it was a strong leadership or whether it was, higher training or whether it was, a better elan. There's just a subtlety there. I don't think there's necessarily one rule you pluck out and say, I'm giving my elite guys this cool special rule, right? If that was true, we just give them the Balrog and they'd win everything.
I'd like the Balrog, please. Yeah. Okay. One of the things we've done in Chain of Command 2, and I'm not here as an advertising service, but
so you mean the tenner you gave me earlier?
Yeah,
I got to give that back.
is we've looked at certain units and we use national characteristics quite a bit based on unit training. So where the Germans have got to focus on using the machine gun, their light machine gun, as the core firepower for their platoon, what we've done is we've just given them a potential boost. And this is an idea I completely nicked after a game with one of the guys from the Warlords, which you guys call exploding sixes.
Yes.
So if you're rolling those 10 dice and you get a couple of sixes in there, you bang out another couple of firepower dice. I like that because sometimes it gives you a boost. Sometimes it gives you no boost at all. But it means that when you're using your skills and drills that you've been trained to the way you've been trained to fight, you are getting a bit of a push in the right direction. It just encourages gamers to use the training that their units have. Different armies train for different things.
It's representing quality as potential.
It's potential.
As opposed to a hard thing.
Yeah.
Alessio?
That's an impossible question.
Oh, sorry. I can give you a more possible one.
Right. Well, I don't know which is my favorite, but certainly I can think of a fun one that we did once, which was a super elite character in Lord of the Rings. Again, going back to Lord of the Rings, is Tom Bombadil. We had this guy is completely immune to everything, completely superior to everything, breaks all the rules, and we kind of went for the trope of he kind of knows he's in a game. He knows he's a character in a game because, he, like in the Lord of the Rings, is a complete thing that doesn't fit. Yeah. Doesn't fit with the rest of the book. Doesn't fit with anything else. And therefore, his profile, his stat line, because we made a model, therefore, like you were saying, oh, I want the stats for Tom Bombadil. I was like, really? Yes. All right. The stats for Tom Bombadil are going to be question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. All the stats were question marks. And basically, you had a couple of special rules that made him fun and interactive, as in very neutral in the sense of you cannot kill him, but he doesn't do too much. But he can influence, he can help. But
He's just happy to be here.
yeah, he's have a song and a dance with his blue boots and Goldberry and so jolly, merry, invincible. I think he kind of is the ultimate elite unit, really. But yeah, I'm trying to avoid the answer to the question, really.
Yeah, that's fine. That's what you meant to do.
I think for me, the kind of mechanics I like are the ones that encourage careful use of your elite troops. For example, sometimes fanatics. So the fanatics, the flagellants, the witch elves, they occur in many, many armies in Warmaster. They always have the same stat line, lots of attacks, but no armor. And they do sometimes, if you use them unwisely, it's like a glass cannon. They will go in, they'll do a lot of damage, and then they die. Or there are other armies, actually, where you get too many of them. And if too many troops have that rule because of all the sort of fanatics, compulsory charges, compulsory moves, once your army gets within, a few centimeters of the enemy, you have no control over what's happening for the rest of the game because they just all go nuts, and it can be quite entertaining. But not burning up your elite troops at the beginning of the game, I think, would be is a good mechanic.
It's an interesting point you make about fanatic and fanaticism, because a lot of the time when you're trying to write elite units, you are really thinking about fanatics, and that's not really the same thing. I think all four of you can speak to. You think of certain troop types, you're like, oh, these guys are just going to attack and attack and attack, but that's not always the same thing as elite, even though many people might connect them. So separating that motivation factor from that quality factor, from that training factor, is one of these things that I've seen a lot of different rules try and do it, and I've never seen anybody quite catch the right way. I mean, I remember in early versions of, I think still versions of Flames of War, you have that separation where, for example, 7th Armoured in Normandy are reluctant veterans. They're really good. They don't want to be shot at. They'll just get out the way. And it's getting that right, that balance right. And, I think ways to do it in certain rules. I don't know if any of you have had a go at trying to manage it in any of your rules?
We've got a situation looking at Russian tank crews. So the lack of a radio net means that what we're doing in Chain of Command is we're saying that the Russian tank crews, tank commanders have to activate individually, whereas something like the German tank commander could have a senior leader who's able to activate other tanks. Now, just by having that tiny difference, you model a complete different ethos and a different way of operating.
But those Russian tank crews could still be veterans. They could still be really good.
They could still be really good. But the fact that the German commander goes, you fire, you fire, you fire, and the Soviet tank commander can't do that because each of the tanks has to activate themselves, makes a completely different style of play.
And then for you with Battleground and your Cold War stuff, it's the same Soviet problem, but you've gone down to a much lower level with the skirmish. So how do you try and think about that veteran leader quality and that strong training quality there?
Yeah, fabulous question. And it's part of the fun in the Cold War era is looking at that leadership, right? So Western armies are very NCO strong, and if you play our game, that really bears out in the game. Whereas a Soviet-based army doesn't have those NCOs. But if you do your research and you go through it and they found out how you keep those units together, they have a strong leadership. But if that leadership goes down, all of a sudden they tend to go to ground, right? And so in our game, right, we model that Soviet forces completely different than Western forces. They play differently, right? You have to think about them differently. And it turns out to be a lot of fun, right? To play a different army who, in our Western minds, doesn't have that strong NCO core, but they have in the beginning with your leadership there, right? They have a lot of strength to them. It's a lot of fun. Don't get your leaders killed, otherwise you're in trouble. But yeah, that difference is subtle difference is a lot of fun to both figure out mechanics for and then play that differences.
Yeah, because I think getting that, there's so much question of how much a good leader makes a good unit that you can get there. And I suppose when it comes down to fantasy, especially with something like Lord of the Rings, it's all great men, it's all big leaders. Getting that, like, what happens when they're lost? Does that unit stay veteran? Does it stay of good quality? Matching it onwards in a way that doesn't, really punish players. Well, you want to punish a player for a bad decision, but doesn't ruin a game completely. Especially when with a point system, they've invested a lot of time and energy into these good units and these good leaders. It's almost like this rules writing thing might be quite difficult.
There's a big difference between units that are elite and heroic actions that are carried out by individuals, and that is something that is harder to model. It's, even if especially if you're doing a platoon level game, you can say, well, this unit is well trained, it's got good leaders, but what about individual acts of heroism? Modeling that in is a totally different thing altogether, and yet that's part of what makes the unit elite. Or is it that we expect them to do brave and tremendous things?
I mean, speaking of going not fantasy, but again World War II, the interesting army that it was very difficult and different to design was the Japanese army, because the spirit of sacrifice, the fact that we gave the fanatics rule effectively to all infantry, meaning they will die to a man. You'd have to kill them all, kind of thing. But the one interesting element there, fun if you want, is the rule applies until there's at least 2 guys in a squad. The moment the last guy is left, then he's no longer fanatic, because the idea is there's nobody looking at me, so I can surrender. And my family will be fine because nobody will know. Yeah, is that kind of, so it goes down to the last guy.
And I think too, one of the things, I hate to jump in, right? We were talking about elite. I do think, and I don't know if you guys agree, that there is a level above elite, right? I think elite units. I think in my head, paratroopers, rangers. These are highly usually led well, highly trained. But then you have like commando level, SAS level, Green Beret level. That's a higher. And I know in our game we treat those differently than quote elite units.
That's a kind of level of elite that hits the point of unpredictability. Because one of the things about the SAS notoriously in the Second World War is you're trawling through the military prisons for those guys. So they're really good, but also they're very unpredictable. They could do really well. They could just not be up for it.
But those are the ones everybody wants to play, right?
But they're normally doing something different on the battlefield, aren't they? They're not playing the conventional warfare game. They're doing things behind the scene that are getting involved with the enemy's lines of communication and so on and so forth, just to try and make life hell for the enemy who are trying to fight a conventional battle. But yeah, I agree. Everybody wants to play the guys with the big white hat. Yeah.
I was going to leap in there and say about I think some of the decisions really on the sort of top level of the game as to how much initiative each individual unit or each individual model is allowed to have within the game. If you've got that kind of command and control mechanic where the unit has to receive orders before it's going to move, loss of the commanders is very, very critical, very punishing. And often, experienced players learn that you need to take a few more reserve commanders just in case you have one of those disasters where somebody gets caught, something unexpected happens, so you don't have half your army unable to move. But on the other sort of end, you've got the units who will just always automatically do the right thing because you don't have to make that roll at the time of making them want to do things.
And I suppose an extreme of that is if you're playing Ancients or Fantasy, I suppose in the same kind of setting, rank and file, is the king, the news of the king having, the king is dead, the king is down. And in Warhammer was the take a panic test with every single unit in the army. And you have that kind of, your army can disintegrate the moment they know that the leader is down. From history, obviously, but yeah, applies to fantasy, orcs, kind of thing. So.
Well, that whole question about, morale tests comes into another thing. People expect elite units to just be able to always pass morale tests. When one aspect of being veterans elites in real life is these guys know what happens when bad things happen, which means they're much less willing, in some senses, to hang around. But in other senses, they might know this isn't that bad. So it's getting that balance right in your, does being elite just mean they're going to roll well for morale, or does that experience become very circumstantial?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a classic situation in the American Civil War where some units of volunteers weren't running away because they didn't realize they were meant to run away, whereas the more experienced units would go, we're getting the hell out of here. So sometimes it works the other way around, but yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's important in a game that when, in our game, it's individuals break or a unit breaks, that they also have the chance to rally and come back, right? Because that was very, very common, like you were mentioning, right? That we're running, and really that running allows us to regroup, come back in and see what happens.
I totally disagree. Yay, we have a debate on the panel.
Only 10 minutes ago, hooray.
See, basically, my philosophy recently is that whenever unit morale degrades to the point that it breaks, as in, obviously, yes, you're right, in history, even in fantasy, in the story, in 2 days, maybe the same day of the battle, they would flee, regroup in the back, and come back maybe for more, even the same day. But for simplicity, really, this is just for simplicity, for me was, all right, but in the snapshot of this battle that this war game represents, which is, an hour, 2 hours maybe of the battle, the fact that this unit is breaking ranks and running, yes, it will regroup, yes, it will come back, not in this war game. This is not right in this. So I find very easy to say, your nerve is broken, your morale has failed, whatever the mechanic is, what is the outcome is remove from table, because that is a cheat, really, is a trick. I don't have to deal with in which direction. I don't have the right rules for in which direction do they run, what do they do, how do they change their behavior, their performance. All of that goes away. The answer is it doesn't matter. For these 2 hours, they are no longer a fighting effective force, so forget about them. Gone. Simpler. Simplistic, perhaps.
I think there's an issue of scale, isn't there? So, for example, if we're playing a platoon level game where the game represents 10, 15 minutes worth of time, if that section breaks and buggers off, it ain't coming back. If we're refighting the whole day or 2 days or whatever of Gettysburg, then that unit is going to rally, and yeah, it might not be storming forward and charging anybody, but it could hold that little round top or whatever the position is. So it's about the outcome has to be pertinent for the scale of game we're playing, both in terms of size and in terms of time.
Well, yeah, and I just mentioned too, scale is a big factor, absolutely. And in our skirmish game, I mean, you could be down to playing just a squad, and that breaking, people break individually, right? Not a unit, and so it offers the player a fun dynamic if you watch them play, because someone breaks and goes, and your squad leader's up with the rest of the men. You now need to decide, right? Am I leading them? Do I need to go back and rally them? Well, guess what? It's the machine gunner. I need to go get him, right? Because I need that weapon back online, and at my command, I have to make those decisions, which adds a fun element to the game. But it's scale. I absolutely agree that if we're playing at a much larger scale, right, then there's no sense in trying to bring those back at all. Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, going back to one of the points I made earlier, it's about speed of play. If a unit is not going to realistically route, rally, and by the time you've got them rallied, the chances of getting them back into the game in a useful way within the time frame of the game, yeah, I agree with Alessio. Take them off because they're not going to be useful. And it's just one less thing to worry about. So again, it goes for speedy play.
But as a poor
play.
dice roller, and my units break all the time, it is just the most disheartening thing.
Well, as a game designer, it does not keep the game tidy if you just whip those units off and go, right, they're not playing anymore, and that makes life a lot easier.
Yes, as well as not worrying, because they are normally subject to rules that kind of make them behave in a very different way, right? What are they doing? Are they moving? Are they not moving? Can they move? If they can move, which way they can go? What can they do? What they cannot do? Blah, blah, blah. So you save a lot of space on your rule book.
It is one of these things where you're like, I've got this really great veteran rule, I've got this really great routing rule. Oh, no one plays it because it's like it's 10:30 on a club night. They're going to take the figures off. They're going to go home. That's it. But God, this conversation could go on for another 45 minutes. But I'm going to round us off here. We'll go right to left and say, Chris, where can people find you? What can you tell them?
Right, so if you want to learn a bit more about Warmaster, I have some flyers. You can download all the rules for free. You can get a lot of the information where you get the armies. While you're here, go out into the exhibition hall, buy the people's stuff. The exhibitors need your support. So for tiny stuff, Pendraken miniatures are okay. Richard O'Keefe will be on the next panel. Thank you.
Well, online you can find me on Facebook because I'm old. I still use Facebook. So, yeah, there's 2 pages, one professional, one personal. But yeah, either one. So Facebook for online, and today I'll be between the Mantic and the Warlord website
And you
stands.
And you'll be back here at 12:45 as well.
Yes, I will.
We can't get rid of you. Where can we find you, Rich?
Hi, well, I'm hanging around doing as little as possible today. Over in the Lards zone, we've got 4 big games on. We've got a trade stand. My colleague Fat Nicholas and I will be demoing Chain of Command 2 in about 15 minutes, and again this afternoon, by which time I'll be useless and knackered, so try and see it in the morning because it might be a bit more interesting. But we've got Strength and Honour happening with Mark Backhouse, the game designer. We've got General Brigade with Christopher Brown, who's the partial game designer. We've got Joe Bilton with a huge water tanker, and Nick and I doing Chain of Command. So, yeah, we're over there by the bins at the back, where we always are.
All right, and if you want to find more about my game, Battleground HD, we have a booth at the end of this particular row. We're doing participation games all day long there. And our booth has some spectacular 3D artists as well. So if you're familiar with Bob McKenzie or Stephen Curry, they are in the booth as well, talk about everything that has to do with 3D modeling, printing as well.
Okay, fantastic, guys. And thank you all for coming and seeing this panel.
All right, thank you
Thank you very
guys.
much. We'll be back in 15 minutes with our small scale panel.